Hey, what's up guys? After patch 10, I've seen a lot of players jumping into Hard Stratagems and Absolute and having a rough time, so I wanted to make this video. Nothing can really make up for lack of time spent playing and practicing, but there are certain things you can start doing right now that'll definitely help improve your play, so without wasting any time, let's get right into it. I don't usually post my solo runs because people don't really watch solo runs, so they don't perform too well, but I have cleared many solo hard stratagems and true solo absolute runs. I'll have some of my solo hard stratagem footage playing in the background, and if you haven't seen any of my videos before, I have over 1,000 hours in Space Marine 2 and I've been playing since day 1 launch. Oh, and if you're a seasoned player already, drop some of your best tips down in the comments to help the newer players out. Alright, tip number 1. Play for armor. Always be proactive about keeping your armor topped off. You want to knock back the little Minoris enemies to open up gun strikes whenever you're missing any armor and it's safe to do so. Don't be lazy and assume that having 2 armor bars is fine when you could have 3 if your character is a 3 armor bar character. And try to treat it as like a mini game where you're always trying to think of how you can keep your armor topped off. And the reason why that it actually matters is because some burst attacks, like if you happen to take a Tyranid sniper shot, or if you get a combo done on you from getting frame trapped by a couple bone sword warriors, they can burst you down quite a bit. And in general, having that armor topped off can give you the best chance to survive and not take big health damage, so always be proactive about keeping your armor topped off. Number 2, don't ignore the barb strangler bramble thorns on the ground. They can get you killed. And also don't ignore spore mines. I used to ignore the barb strangler bramble thorns that are on the ground. Those are those Tyranid guys that shoot those like thorny vine things, and I would just kind of try to play around them and just avoid them as much as I could, and I didn't think it was worth it to waste time clearing them. But I watch some high level players sometimes, and I noticed that some of the best players do take time to clear them out. And you don't always want to clear every single bramble thorn, but if you have an idea that you might be in that zone fighting for longer than expected, then you definitely do want to get those cleared out, because if they slow you down and keep taking your armor down, it can get you killed a lot more than you think. And when I started taking those out more proactively, I started surviving a little bit more often. It definitely adds up. And it's the same thing with spore mines. Don't ignore spore mines, even if it seems like they're just chilling, floating around, and you're not in any kind of imminent threat. It only takes a split second for them to completely down you, so make sure you're clearing out those spore mines as soon as you get the chance to safely do so. And another quick tip is, when you're fighting biovores, you always want to clear out their spore mines. If they shoot out 3 spore mines, you clear out 3 spore mines, and you keep doing that as you're working your way closer to them until you get in their jump zone, where if you clear out their spore mines, they'll eventually pull themselves out and jump at you, or you can just walk all the way right up to them and they'll also pull themselves out. But just always clear those out. Alright, number 3, learn enemy attack patterns by heart. Why do you need to do that? 1, because it helps you perform under pressure. There are certain scenarios in the game, like when both your allies are dead, you've been in a run for 40 minutes already, and it's up to you now, and you don't want to lose that 40 minutes just to be completely wasted from you guys wiping, and your heart starts beating a little faster and your fingers are getting sweaty, and it actually makes it more difficult for you to pull off moves. So if you know enemy attack patterns by heart, you're going to be able to perform under pressure. And the other reason that you want to know the enemy attack patterns by heart is because if I know that, for instance, a Terminator has a 2-part swing attack when you get in melee zone, I can kind of like parry his 2-part swing attack while I'm looking beyond him in the distance because I might have to dodge a Hellbrute cannon shot that's back there behind him coming at me, or I might have to dodge a sorcerer ranged attack. So it just helps a lot to be able to do certain things on autopilot, so it can kind of like free your attention up to scan for other threats. And that's one big way that you're going to be able to stay alive a lot more, is just always scanning for threats even while you're in melee combat. So you need to learn to multitask a little bit, and the only way that you're going to be able to do that is by learning the enemy attack patterns by heart. How can you learn it by heart? Well, that's the unfortunate part, is it's just a lot of practice. But one thing I found does help is if you consciously count the number of attacks when enemies are attacking you, and eventually your mind will just start to quickly recognize, like, okay, double sword warrior has a 3-part combo and he also does a 2-part combo sometimes. So always be counting them, and that way you'll just learn them a little bit faster rather than just not counting them and kind of zoning out. All right, 4, use cover to your advantage. I've put this tip in other videos before, but it is super important, and I'm gonna put a clip in the background of me using cover in a boss fight against the Carnifex. And one of the main reasons why using cover to your advantage is so important is because there's certain scenarios in the game where sometimes frame traps can be unavoidable. A frame trap is when 2 enemies are attacking you and their attacks kind of overlap in such a way that it's actually impossible for you to avoid damage through dodging or parrying. And by using cover, you can kind of avoid those frame trap scenarios by eliminating one of the enemies from the equation by putting the cover in between yourself and them. So in this Carnifex boss fight, I had a couple ranged Tyranid snipers shooting at me, and because of the way that the charge up works on the sniper shots, and because of the way that the delay on the Carnifex melee swing attacks, sometimes they can overlap where the sniper shot is coming in just as the Carnifex is kind of like winding up to swing, and it makes it almost impossible to avoid both. And so you'll see in this clip that I'm kind of keeping the box in between myself and the Tyranid snipers for that extra bit of cover. And you could also use it the other way. So if a Carnifex is shooting his ranged spike attacks at you and you're dealing with like some bone sword warriors, if you can put cover in between yourself and the Carnifex to deal with the bone sword warriors, it'll drastically increase your odds of survival. Alright, tip 5, being close to enemies is usually safer. An example of this that you may not think would be true, but the Carnifex is actually more deadly at range than up close once you learn his attack patterns. Why is that? It's because the ranged attacks from the Terminus enemies in this game have massive hitboxes, and some of them have like tricky delays or really fast startups, and also they do massive damage. So in the end, it becomes so difficult to avoid the Terminus enemy range fire that it's actually just easier in a lot of cases to go right up to them, and you'll be a lot safer in those scenarios, especially with the Hellbrute in particular. His ranged cannon attacks, the massive one that leaves the trail that damages you, or the little green shots that he does, they both have kind of like weird delays and massive hitboxes, and they do insane damage. And he's really not that tricky up close once you learn his couple melee attacks that he has and how to dodge them. And so it ends up being a lot safer just to fight him in melee range. And I'll show some clips of me fighting a Hellbrute in the background here. Alright, tip 6. Learn to abuse enemy turn speed. Super high damage ranged enemies like the Tyranid Spike Shooters, the Rubik Marines, and the Chaos Minigun Terminator, they all have pretty slow turn rate. What do I mean by turn rate? Is just literally how fast they can turn their body. So if you move at an angle to them to get to the side to them as you're moving closer to them, then they'll actually have a hard time keeping up with you as they're turning their body, and you can avoid quite a bit of damage that way. And so in general, with all of those enemies, you want to work your way up close to them and kind of work your way to the side so their fire can't keep up with you. And that's the best way that you're going to be able to stay alive in situations where you're facing down fire from multiple ranged enemies. And I'll show a clip here of me kind of abusing the turn speed of a ranged Terminator when both my allies are dead and I'm just fighting them by myself in a hard stratagem. Tip 7, always be paying attention to breakpoints and how many attacks it takes to get an enemy into the execute status. Why? Is because you can actually plan out your moves better when you know exactly how long it's going to take to kill an enemy. So for instance, like if a Hellbrute is charging up his big cannon and I've got a minigun Terminator right in front of me, if I know that it takes one gun strike and then a power rake attack to get him into the execute status, then I'm going to be able to decide if I have enough time to get him into the execute and get that execute started and get those invincibility frames to avoid the Hellbrute's cannon charge up attack. And there's just a lot of situations where it kind of plays out like that, where it's really in your benefit to know exactly how much it's going to take to hit a breakpoint to get an enemy down. And the more of those breakpoints that you learn, the better you're going to kind of weave in between executes and iframes and keep yourself alive a little bit better. And you would be surprised how much of a difference that can make. And the way that you can learn breakpoints is either if you're on PC, you can download the testing menu mod and kind of test it out in the testing arena to see how many attacks and how certain combos get enemies to their breakpoints. And the other way you can do it just in the normal game is just run one weapon for a few runs, and as you learn that weapon better and better, you'll just start to memorize all of its different breakpoints. And then once you know those breakpoints, you can branch back out into trying different stuff, and eventually you'll kind of have a pretty good idea of all of them. But that's the best way, is just to take it back down just to one weapon of each type, however many the class you're playing uses, and just memorize those breakpoints and then work your way out from there. Tip 8. If you're playing with allies and they're execute jacking you, learn to preemptively hit execute before the enemy is even in the execute status. You want to start hitting it as soon as you know the enemy's about to die. So the way that works is a lot of people hit the execute button as soon as they see the enemy flashing red, indicating that the enemy's in the execute status. But the way that if somebody's stealing your executes and kind of like forcing you to take damage and you guys are not able to share armor restorals because of that, the best way to kind of get ahead of them is right before you know the enemy's about to die. Like if you guys have been damaging them a little bit and you think they're gonna go down pretty soon, just start hitting it already, and 9 times out of 10 it'll help you get that execute. Don't do that if you're in a nice match with nice people and they're already sharing with you, but if you know it's come down to it, that's how you can get your execute still. Alright, and then tip 9, learn multi-parries and whiff recoveries. So a multi-parry is sometimes in the game, like say 3 Bonesword warriors are attacking you, you might have to parry like 4 or 5 times immediately in a row before you can actually get your attack off or get your gun strike off. So don't always assume that you can just parry once and go on the attack. Just practice doing multi-parries, that way you can kind of get used to them. Another multi-parry situation is with like triple Lictor or triple Ravener. So the best way you can deal with that is just be in the mindset, if you're getting attacked by a bunch of Bonesword warriors or triple extremists, just know, keep in your mind that you might have to parry quickly a few times in a row before you can go on the attack. And on that note, never just gun strike immediately after a parry. Always take a split second and ask yourself, is it safe to gun strike right now? because that's the number one way that you can take a lot of unnecessary damage, is taking unsafe gun strikes. And this is a whiff recovery, so I'll show you where I whiff, and then you can kind of cheat the parry recovery window by clicking the attack button. So mouse 4 is my attack button, so watch, I whiff this parry, and then I quickly hit attack, and then quickly hit parry again, and I'm able to parry sooner than if I had to go through the whole whiff animation for the parry. And that's how you can kind of recover a whiffed parry. And once you build that into your muscle memory, you'll take a lot less hits from whiffing, and it'll be a lot less punishing. And the last tip I've got for you here is just to adopt a learning mindset. Every little tiny piece of knowledge can add up to a huge difference, and there's just things that matter that you would never even think of. So always try to be curious and learning little tiny details about the game, because you never know when it could actually make a difference in your run. For instance, I had never thought of abusing the enemy turn speed until even somewhat recently, and it can actually help you stay alive a lot more in certain situations. And then, you know, just other examples of little things is like the Chaos Rubik Marines, those kind of like decals that go above their helmet that actually counts as the headshot zone, so you can aim for that if you're having trouble hitting their little tiny head. So in a way, they actually have a bigger head than you think, because you can hit those big things that are on the top of their helmet. And just a lot of other small things that kind of add up that you wouldn't necessarily think of. So always be paying attention, always make mental notes like, oh yeah, that's how I can do that, or oh, I didn't know that makes a difference. So if you guys found this video useful, drop a like on it for me, and if you've been enjoying my content, consider subscribing. It really does help the channel. Thanks guys, have a good one.